hey, look at this physical box that exists. It's that console that Sony says is not real, the PlayStation 4 Slim. Now, this console, of course, does not exist. Sony will not acknowledge that it exists and that it's out in the world, but
So hey, this thing exists. This is Sony's newest model of the PS4, affectionately called by many the PS4 Slim. It's gaming's most recent worst-kept secret, helped along by a huge set of leaks leading up to Sony's anticipated September PlayStation-focused press conference. Most of us have seen leaked photos, but today things hit a high fever pitch when Let's Play Video Games editor-in-chief Laura Dale decided this morning to throw caution to the wind and drop a full unboxing and review of the console. This naturally threw enough credibility behind the existence of the console for even the most paranoid. That is, unless you're Sony. You see, the really odd thing about this is Sony's silent insistence that this console does not exist. By itself, that might just seem silly, but it creates a really messy situation. When these leaks began online, naturally, the press did what they could to get information, both from Sony and from other sources, and Laura was not the only one to get their hands on one of these non-existent machines. And what we were left with were days of the press and consumers trying to guilt Sony into owning up to what was so very clearly obvious, and were being met with silence. Then Laura decided to drop the bomb, and all bets were off, with every news site clamoring to drop their own version of basically the exact same thing printed on LPVG, which is pretty impressive given that the site itself was only a few weeks old. Even more, there really weren't any complaints made about the console itself. In fact, the review was very positive, save for the lack of an optical port. It was hard to make any other critiques given how little it changed from PS4 vanilla. And still nothing from Sony. Oh, the things that this reveals. This is one of the most ridiculous cases of corporate arrogance I have ever seen, and I still remember the Xbox One announcement vividly.
TV. Sport television.
For some reason, Sony is convinced that people are somehow going to be impressed by this machine, like there's some group of wizards pulling this out of their rear ends. We're witnessing corporate PR running at its final form, locking down any possibility of anyone talking to the press or customers about the console that most certainly does, in fact, exist. It's an amazing show of arrogance, given that we all know exactly what's supposed to be at this PlayStation event. The Neo, another console that itself leaked months ago, and one that Sony actually did acknowledge in order to dodge criticism for not having it at E3 earlier this year. Which only makes the silence about the Slim even more weird. It's not the biggest announcement they've got up their sleeve. It's not like I can't appreciate the power of a surprise move, it can work out really well, such as when the PlayStation 4 was revealed to fully support used games to rousing applause and completely sweep Microsoft off their feet. Or what about when they announced the price of the original PlayStation?
$299.
But the Slim isn't a surprise, and while some of the changes are welcome, it's not all that impressive by itself. The need to control the narrative isn't belonging just to Sony. Nintendo of America's president gave an interview this week saying that Nintendo needs to do a better job of explaining whatever the heck the NX is to consumers, which they definitely do, but then proceeded to say nothing about the console at all. And that in itself is okay, I guess, as they've at least acknowledged the thing's existence, and I personally would like Nintendo to make sure it has its ducks in a row for once before going full throttle on a new machine. However, they are leaking just as much as anyone else, with one big detailed report on the setup dropping last week, and today bringing even more details on that, brought to us both by, guess who? Saying nothing at all leaves fans hanging on Nintendo's every word, to the point where they may not even care what the NX is actually called, let alone what it does, when Nintendo does decide it's ready for showtime. Consider, too, how much of this ends up being the fault of the hype machine. How many games do we find out now not because of official announcements or show floor or even exclusives from press, but because pre-orders need to be taken the second a game is announced, so the games show up in computer systems, and the promo materials show up weeks in advance? What did Sony genuinely expect to happen if it was sending secret game consoles to stores trying to look like magicians? What's even worse than that is the fact that game companies expect, sometimes even demand, that the games press play along with them. After the LPVG report went live, Laura Dale explained her reasons for deciding to go live with the Slim. As Laura is also a known freelancer, it turns out that she was working on possibly doing the review/unboxing with multiple major games news sites. But by the time last weekend passed, every single outlet she had talked to had backed out of the piece. And it's pretty interesting that the two biggest game stories of the day both originated not on IGN or Polygon, but on a brand new site comprised of 3 people and funded completely by Patreon. While it isn't hard to figure out why outlets might not have wanted to be the ones to break this, the fear of retaliation in case you didn't know, that doesn't make it any less sad. In fact, Eurogamer was going to be the first to have an unboxing of the Slim, only to have that ex-nayed by higher-ups out of fear of Sony's response. There were stories going around too of Sony handing out DMCA claims on posts about the situation, and the threat is pretty real. You see, back in 2007, Jeff Gertzman was removed from GameSpot over conflict between game reviews and the advertisers on the site, following a low score given for Kane and Lynch 2. According to disclosures given 5 years later, Kane and Lynch's review was not the only issue that caused problems. Guess who else threatened to pull ads over a review? Yup. Back when Borderlands 2 was announced, the exclusive announcement was given to Game Informer. But Eurogamer, noticing some trends yet, caught wind of the game's announcement and promptly dropped a report on the game. While the report was 100% on the nose, Gearbox boss Randy Pitchford denied it, saying, "I kid you not, we've only announced what we've announced. If we haven't announced it, it doesn't exist." How about those trends you were noticing? Once the report went live and spread like fire, Pitchford doubled down on this, actually tweeting, "Shoddy journalism is not an announcement." Seriously. And I'm honestly not surprised that this is what the industry would do, decide to sell the press down the river anytime they don't play nice with the PR machine. It's not even hard, considering that there are hundreds of online corporate white knights ready to call 30 GameStops trying to discredit any report publications drop that doesn't fuel the hype machine. But let me make something abundantly clear. The press is not beholden to game companies. A press that is just a glorified PR agent, regurgitating press releases and GameStop pre-orders ad nauseum, doesn't do anything to make games better or inform us of the truth. And what is that truth? Well, the truth of the PS4 Slim is that it exists, despite Sony's insistence to the otherwise. This company was, and is, prepared to treat its audience like idiots who cannot read. And Let's Play Video Games, Eurogamers, and others have called Sony to the mat on this. This is where we are reminded, once again, like I've said, that how video games are marketed tells a lot about how those companies view you as a person. And thank God for these outlets that help expose that further. And now Sony is the one who's going to take the stage and announce this thing like it's some sort of brilliant idea that they've just come up with. Except now they're the ones looking like idiots. There is a way around this, Sony. You could pull your head out of your rear end and get ahead of this. Because right now, you're not acting like the Sony that protected used games at E3 and got roarous applause. You're acting more like, well, the Sony that announced the PS3 to silence.
It's a real thing. Stop telling people it's not real.
Real talk, though. If the NX actually does have a share button, and let's face it, these guys at Let's Play Video Games are pretty good at their job, Nintendo's going to have to change its YouTube policy, isn't it? Or is it really just going to try to make a bunch of money off of everyone playing its console? Constantly. Ugh.